Okay, so if you haven't been living under a rock, you've probably seen all over this green Shrek goblin juice looking drink that we all call matcha all over your social media. I think for me, it's gotten to a point where either yourself or someone you know is drinking this drink on a pretty regular basis. But how did this drink go from being a drink that is exclusively drunk by the Buddhist monks across Asia to now being drunk by my soccer mom of a coworker in Australia? We're going to be looking at matcha's origins, rise, and future to understand what this drink truly is doing to captivate this many people. So grab a drink, maybe a matcha, and let's get cracking. Now, believe it or not, matcha actually originates from China and was brought over into Japan by a Buddhist monk who was studying there in around the year 1100. And this monk spread matcha across Japan and slowly started establishing the practice of chado, or tea ceremony, which involves the whisking and the preparation of the tea leaves into matcha. And drinking matcha worked really well with these monks because it really aligned with their needs. You know, being one of the green teas with the highest caffeine content at around 70 milligrams per cup, it aided in things like memory, perception, and alertness, alongside the myriad of health benefits that it also provided. And even back then, matcha wasn't just something that was planted anywhere. It was planted specifically in temple grounds across Kyoto and Kamakura. And it was almost reserved for only the elite, and it was sort of seen as this status symbol, which is interesting because it sits in stark contrast with who and how matcha is consumed today. Matcha's boom today arguably began with it being this sort of health conscious and almost aesthetic alternative to your everyday coffee, being consumed by the likes of social media influencers, celebrities, and those matcha girlies that you see online. Also a growing group of performative boys or men that are also drinking this matcha, but we'll get into that later. For now, let's look at how matcha shifted from being consumed by the most elite and enlightened Buddhist monks across Asia to now becoming TikTok's favorite powder. Now, before we look into how matcha actually rose, it's important to understand why it rose, right? Now, matcha's rise actually came in the perfect time, around 2010s, when matcha was still a little baby compared to the alternatives. We were living in a society where people were starting to question all the health choices in their lives. You know, we saw people in the West beginning to question, okay, is it okay to be consuming all these processed foods, all these seed oils, all these sugars and everything like that? And this ultimately led to people essentially health maxing their lives. God, I hate that I use that term right now, but it's the best way to explain it. People were essentially trying to look for healthy alternatives in every aspect of their lives. And for many coffee drinkers, this meant ditching the 5 sugars and 5 cream coffees they were having every morning and looking for other healthier alternatives. And now this is where matcha comes into play. Now that we understand the why, we can slowly start understanding how it actually became such an influential drink today. Now, I think one big introduction in the West, especially for matcha, was through the 2015 launch of Starbucks' matcha across the world. And I think this is where matcha really got its first big hit. And you may ask yourself as well, what also was rising around 2015? Social media. So now not only did we have people beginning to consume this drink, we also saw people posting about it and the amazing benefits that it was giving them. I think the taste is one thing, but another thing that we can't overlook is the aesthetics of the drink. I think on social media especially, aesthetics are a huge thing, and matcha really fulfilled that category. I mean, just looking at the way, you know, the green liquid mixes in the white, it just looks really satisfying. And so it makes sense in that way. And so the healthier, trendier, more aesthetic alternative to coffee really had a perfect environment to take off. Now, not only was it just an aesthetic drink, we also saw people like social media influencers and celebrities holding the drink in photos like that. So when you see your favorite celebrities drinking matcha, you kind of want to join in that group as well. And so matcha was essentially this ticket into an elite community. And we all know too, matcha has pretty positive connotations associated to it. And so not only was it an exclusive club that you're getting yourself into, you're also in this healthy club. So it makes you look good in that way as well. Now, I think this touches on my next point. Matcha was a device for people to use to get access into this community. And it was a drink that was really good at building this community because it wasn't like coffee. It was still something that was growing. You know, even if you meet another coffee drinker in public, you're not going to be too surprised because so many people consume coffee. But with matcha, if you're a matcha drinker and you meet someone else who drinks matcha, it's kind of like an instant spark there, as if you're part of this exclusive club together. Now, I think especially for Asians, it was a perfect thing for us too, because a lot of us grew up drinking tea over coffee in our households. So when matcha came out, it was another perfect thing for us. We gravitated towards it because we could still get our hit of caffeine whilst drinking tea at the same time. And on top of this, being a drink that originates from Asia, it's something that we immediately had that spiritual connection with. And so what it essentially did was it built a community for Asians, something to collectively meet together with. It's not catching up for a coffee anymore, it's let's go get a matcha. Add to this the matcha desserts, the pastries, and everything else. Matcha is going to be everywhere. I think another important thing that can't be overlooked is this sort of Japanese connotation that matcha has to it. You know, alongside the rise of Japan and its popularity through anime, food culture, travel, cherry blossoms, all the above, matcha was also another thing that people started taking interest in because they were already interested in Japan itself. And so these factors are probably the main reasons we saw matcha's rise since 2015. Now, Matcha Today sits in an interesting position. It's not just a drink for those health enthusiast matcha girlies that we see everywhere. It's becoming more of a mainstream alternative to coffee and other beverages. In the West, I think there's still a bit of an allure or a mystery to matcha, but I think in Asia, it's pretty much commonplace. In my workplace, for example, my soccer mom of a coworker who has her matcha every day will still get questions from the other coworkers about what she's drinking and why she's drinking that over coffee. Now, bear in mind, this workplace is primarily Caucasian and people are mostly above their 40s, but it just goes to show how matcha still has a little bit to cut through in the West. But at the same time, I could leave my office, walk about 5 minutes to the city, and there'll be people drinking matcha, holding matcha, taking videos of matcha everywhere I go. And so it's still going through a balancing act in that sense. I think in our generation, in Gen Z, matcha is pretty much commonplace and you won't really get questioned for drinking it. I think because most of our generation is on Instagram, is on TikTok, and we see matcha on those platforms everywhere, you're rarely going to get questioned about it. And we're starting to see not only women and select groups of people drinking matcha, but also other groups of people, like these performative boys who are drinking matchas, listening to Claro, having their tote bags, wearing their cardigans. These types of groups of people drinking matcha are also growing as well. My point being, matcha isn't just commonplace for our generation, it's almost the preferred option, especially for select groups. I mean, there's reasons matcha shortages are being experienced at the moment. We're literally drinking and eating all this matcha away. I think for the future, matcha is going to keep growing, and we're also going to start seeing more other alternatives pop up as well. For example, something that I've been slowly seeing creeping on my radar is hojicha. I've been seeing it pop up in cafes here and there, especially in the Japanese-inspired cafes. I think we'll see more options like these rise alongside matcha booming at the same time. It's possible as well for matcha specifically, we're probably going to see more innovations. Hell, I've seen matcha face scrubs, matcha perfumes, matcha-inspired body washes, all the above, you name it. It's going to start becoming more and more commonplace. Now, it's still early days, but I think if matcha keeps growing at this trajectory, I'm a bit worried about the matcha manufacturers because it's not just an easy plant that you can grow. You know, it's a super labor-intensive plant to grow, and it requires the workers constantly monitoring things like the shade levels, the moisture, the pests. And if you want the really ceremonial grade or the high grade stuff that a lot of people want, this is really only grown in 3 places in Japan, which is either in Uji, Nishio, or Shizuoka. And a lot of these places too are starting to experience more changing weather conditions due to things like global warming. And so the pressure keeps rising for these matcha manufacturers, essentially creating a shitstorm for these matcha manufacturers. Now, brass tacks, I think the point is that a lot of people want matcha, but there's not enough manufacturers. And so it paints a pretty bleak picture for the future. I'm hoping for the future, more alternatives can keep popping up and more manufacturers of this matcha can start to enter the market. I think the rise of matcha has been quite an interesting thing, and I'm curious to see how more and more commonplace this drink will become. Being a drink that was originally consumed by these Buddhist monks across Asia to now becoming a drink consumed by everyone and their mothers, it's truly fascinating to see how far this drink has come. I hope you've learned something from this video. If you have, please subscribe, engage with my content. I would really appreciate it. And until then, I'll see you next time.